Hey, Oceanaga, everybody. This is your host, Joshua Hopping, and welcome to a special episode, July 4th episode of Fractured Faith, a Mosaic of Beliefs. As everybody hopefully knows by now, it is America's 250th birthday. I'm actually recording this and probably release this on July 3rd. So I'm like, a day early. Granted, the 4th was not really when they signed the Declaration of Independence anyway, but that's a different story on that piece. But I wanted to kind of jump in here and chat a little bit about the two flags in my heart, a Cherokee reflection on the America's birthday. For those of you new, I am a Cherokee Nation citizen. I'm also a U.S. citizen, and I'm also, of course, or used to be a pastor church planner. And I am definitely a follower of the incarnated Creator, Jesus of Nazareth, being really kind of focused on Him in so many ways. And yeah, I really kind of want to share a little bit about this mixed feelings that I have on July 4th. And it's kind of been this way growing in the last couple of decades, as I've definitely seen a lot more struggles, I think, with our nation and a lot more things happening. I've been sitting in a lot of the kind of the sadness of what's going on politically and just in practicality. But even beyond that, there's always kind of been this kind of tension and emotions with this one. Now, I do love America. I am a patriot in the sense that I do think the United States has valued the Constitution. There's something we've done in the world. There's some good people in this country. Some good things we've done, a lot of not so good things we've done as well, but there still is some good values in this one. And I have been blessed to travel a lot of places in the world, probably about a dozen or 15 different countries. And I've seen a lot, and there's some good things about this one country. And there's also some other countries that are a little bit, that are just as good in a lot of ways too. But all that say is I do really like US. I will hang a US flag out my window at times. I will also have a Cherokee flag out there. In fact, right now it currently is a Cherokee flag that's out there in front of my house. And that's really where I want to kind of talk about is that Cherokee perspective, because every 4th of July, I am reminded how the birth of America also marked the beginning of a loss for my people's freedom. Okay. This is an abstract ideal. This is actually within my own family tree and within who I am. Because you see, I had family that fought on both sides of the war, the Revolutionary War. So if I look at my British side, John Hopping, he immigrates from England in 1670. His first child actually was born in 1680, Matthias, and that's my third child is actually named after that Matthias. But he comes into Long Island. He's there. He settles in the colonies, and his great grandson David C. Hopping fights for the American Independence War, right? So actually, even I have this really awesome book here on the side here, and it talked about how he actually was, this pool basically under Morris Graham, Colonel Morris Graham, is where he kind of served up in New York, New Jersey area, is part of the Revolutionary War. So I mean, it's like there, boom, that's my ancestor is David C. Hopping. It's down. I could trace that line all the way down to myself. Now, there's another branch of the Cherokee branch that tells a different story. Now, that's where James Daltrey has a European name because his father, Cornelius Daltrey, was the first European of any descent to be able to marry into Cherokees, Irish trader, merchant who was serving the British crown. And his son, James Daltrey, he was a Cherokee. He was probably about 25 years of age. And he was there, and he most likely fought alongside Britain. Now, he fought not because he loved the king per se, but because Britain had showed to promise actually to show a lot more compassion to the tribes and to kind of stop the colonial expansion into tribal land going to the west, the Appalachians, after Ponca's War. So you have to remember then the empire, then the British Empire that actually was controlling the colonies of America, also had colonies like all in the Indies and Caribbeans and over in India and Africa. It's like huge, big, global empire. And they talked about how the sun never set on the British Empire because it was just so big. And in the Poncas War, kind of up leading up to this, was have been in the 1750s, 60s, coming in there. The Ponca that war really kind of forced Britain's hand, and they actually issued this Royal Proclamation of 1763 to be able to say, hey, the colonists are to stay on the east side of the Appalachian Mountains. We're not going to go into Ohio. We're not going to push that direction. We're going to stop, and we're going to let the tribes. Not because the king really loved the Native Americans right now, but the war was expensive. They had a war with France. The French and Indian War was huge. They had a lot of expenses. They were trying to control it. They had more profitable colonists that they want to go to. And so they said, we're going to stop this one. And we were telling everybody to hold off. And they were engaging in trade and commerce with the tribes at the time. Now, that really got some people really mad. So you actually had the Black Boys rebellion. The Black Boys was actually James Black Boy Jimmy Smith. This is like 1763. And he grew in Pennsylvania. And they started actually fighting against British soldiers that were taking trade goods and weapons and things to the tribes. Think about that. You had private citizens, fighting the British military, their own military, okay? It's like me going and fighting against a bunch of U.S. soldiers down at the fort somewhere. I just say, hey, I don't like you. I'm going to go fight you. It was basically a terrorist act within their own country because they didn't want the British crown to actually help or work with the tribes. That was it. Okay. And that Black Boy rebellion begins to grow and be able to get more and more going on. In fact, this is actually where the beginning of where I think that kind of the War of Independence really came, because that's really, I think, the big colonist rebellion against the British was starting with the Black Boys. And then they started getting more so because the colonists wanted to go and take over the land. And that's where actually the Stamp Act was passed to be able to help fund the soldiers the British soldiers to protect against, raise money because of the war debt they had, but also they were actually housing soldiers in the colonists' houses. Why? Because the colonists were trying to take over native land, and the Britain had a treaty with the Indians, and they were trying to stop them. So like that, there's that connection going in. In fact, a lot of the founding fathers, including speculator George Washington, had an enormous financial interest in taking over those Indian lands to be able to do it. Okay. And this is where a lot of those revolutions begins and coming into it. And this is where I think we got to go back to the Declaration of Independence, because there really is a center in there where kind of describes why they fought against, why they fought, because I would say right now, most of us always say, well, it's taxations without reputations. Well, not really. Okay. It is, but it isn't, right? I think taxation representation was basically a marketing scheme really to help to get the poor people to fight, because they got taxed way more afterwards, and we got taxed way more now than it ever was before. But really, the Declaration starts off with say, hey, we hold these truths to be, come to be able to pursue life, liberty, and justice or whatnot. And then you actually go through all these grievances coming down. And as he leads up to the kind of climax of this, the kind of big grievance is grievance charge 27. And it says that King George had excited domestic insurrection among us and endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of the frontiers, the merchants as Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is undistinguishing destruction of all ages, sexes, conditions. So merchants as Indian savage right here. So, he was talking about me and my ancestors, my people, right? And the Declaration was saying, like, this is what's going on. Like, these people that you have on it, these people you're trading with, these people you treated with, they're causing us problems. And we don't like that. And we're going to do it. And I actually think that also that's one of the points that comes into a lot of history books. If you look at the Continental Congress, which was kind of that ruling government before between the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. Like I think the first or second act, I think it was the second act, or that the Continental Congress made this decision, is they decided, how do we sell off the land that we take from the Indians? Because they're like, hey, we got to gather all this land. The land that was colonist, well, obviously that belongs to the people there, but this new land, this Indian land, how do we sell it off? Because we got to make money. So it really kind of, again, frames the question, was really who controlled the land and who controls the income. It was less about taxation and more about the land. Now, I will say taxation was a part of declarations because it really does play, helped it, and it does help with getting average everyday person to fight on your behalf, quite frankly. But that really became the ideal of like, whose freedom, like what freedom, right? We celebrate freedom, unfortunately. Oh, we have freedom. Well, the freedom really was for white colonists, right? Male colonists, quite frankly. For the Cherokees, we lost our freedom, right? The Cherokee lost their freedom. We actually continued to fight against the colonists up until like I think 1795, 94, right in that part. Dragon Canoe, which was part of the Cherokee group, actually kept fighting. There's other parts of the Cherokee Nation that kind of got split, that kind of settled for peace before then. But we held fights all the way up until the 1790s. And then later on, as we got driven out of Georgia, we got driven out of the Carolinas, we got put in reservations, we got beat up and killed, and we had no freedom of religion until 1978. That's like 48 years ago. We didn't get it. In fact, we actually didn't even have citizenship until 1924 when the Indian Citizen Act was signed in 1924. Now, some of the Cherokees got it, I think, about 1905, 1906, about 20 years earlier, because after the Dawes Act. But before then, you couldn't be a Cherokee citizen and a U.S. citizen. You were either a Cherokee or you were an American. And my ancestors were Cherokee, and we were always cited in Cherokee. There was one period in there, I think, where we tried to become an American. We kind of were hanging out in Georgia after the Trail of Tears a little bit, and that kind of through the Civil War. But then we're like, nope, forget it. We're going to go back west. We're going to go hang out with our relatives there. And of course, we actually look about freedom for who? Well, enslaved Africans, blacks, they didn't get freedom. They didn't get freedom until after the Civil War and then later on. So when we hear all this stuff about freedom from who? For what? Okay, so we got our freedom for Britain, but they taxed us because they were in wars, and they taxed the colonists because they were using that money to fund the wars. But doesn't the U.S. government do that right now for us? We have several wars right now. We've had a lot of wars that I know I don't agree with. Of course, I lean towards the pacifists and nonviolence. I would say whole war is bad. But that's really where I struggle with. How do I celebrate? I want to celebrate the ideals. I want to celebrate the Constitution, these ideals of we can make a land of equality, that we can be able to live in a place where we have democracy. I like the fact that we get to vote. I think there's rules and governance to win that one. I do not think majority rules, but that is a good thing. I think there's some really good things in our country. And I think there's some good ones, but I also want to mourn the failures. I want to mourn the treatments of minorities in this country. And I want to mourn that just as much as I want to celebrate what America says it wants to be. And so as we come into like this 4th of July, it really is a mixed emotion. I want to be able to go, hey, yeah, great, America, we're doing good. America has done a lot around the world when it comes to, protecting others. I'm thinking right now more of some of the, even missionaries and humanitarian aid has always a mixed bag, but we've done a lot of humanitarian work. We've done a lot to be able to help people out. I've been able to travel overseas and talk to people, and they really are happy with some of the stuff that we've done. And that's pretty amazing. And it's great to be the American that deals. I also know that, we had an empire and that there's things there too. So It is something that it is crazy. It is one of those ones I don't quite know what to do with it. So I'm like, I got, multiple relatives, families. I got David C. I got James. I got, how do I do it now? Right. In places. I will say that my heart does lean towards the Cherokee Nation at the moment, but I will also say the Cherokee Nation has its own problems that it's got to deal with as well. People are just messy. Right? People are messy. Maybe I come back to the Jesus of Nazareth, right? Because even within the church, there's messiness in the church. There's a tension. There's a tension here, not yet tension here, right? That we're living in, always in this tension happening. Where again, even in the churches where we say, hey, we want to hold these things of the gifts of the Spirit up, and yet we don't always do that with our scandals and such. So it is definitely going to be an interesting weekend. 250 years, definitely a long time to be able to have. And I really do hope that we will continue to more to greater freedom. I really hope that we be able to rejoice at having a diverse culture, a diverse nation with many voices. I think that is much better than having a single voice, and be able to rejoice with people of all kinds and be akin to it. So, as a Cherokee citizen and an American citizen, I don't celebrate because America has always lived up to its ideals. I celebrate because these ideals are something that calls us to be better. And so I want to continue to do that. And I also do want to recognize that the scriptures reminds us that every nation is judged not by its strength, but by its justice. Every nation falls short, right? Okay, America is no exception. Cherokee Nation is no exception. Patriotism should never require forgetting our nation's sins, but we also can mourn, but we also does that mean we cannot have hope. We can still have hope in going on. So we continue to have that one. And I would say even probably the most patriotic thing we can is pretending that is not pretending our history is perfect, but loving our country enough to tell the truth about it and to keep working through justice and mercy and liberty for all as we come through. So again, continue to push for our ideals, what this country is, and be happy for our neighbors, our friends, our families, our towns that we have here, and enjoy the fireworks, enjoy some grilling, and enjoy that one. But also, I don't know, give a toast for those that have had seen the dark side of the country just as much as you give a toast for those who've seen the bright side. So anyway, that's some of the thoughts and emotions as I kind of struggle through this holiday area. In fact, chuckle right at the end because I'm just reminded I actually attend the Good Medicine Way church, is a Native American church that is actually in Albuquerque, New Mexico, but we have a great online presence, by the way. If you guys have not done that one, just look up Good Medicine Way. And it is just we have a lot of videos coming on things. We have sermons and worship, very contextual in listening to Jesus in that way. Really some really good stuff. But Uncle Casey Church there, he's always talking about we were in the church. He was saying about a happy decolonialization day, right? Or colonial day. Actually, we got decolonialized it, but happy colonial day. So, because that kind of is a birthday of the country. So, like I said, it's definitely a mixed bag on this one. And as someone with blood on both sides of that war and continue to wrestle within myself, it is interesting one. So celebrate with it. I actually would say actually end with this one is I would say one of the ways you can celebrate this country is actually digging into the culture or digging into the history of this particular country, because there's a lot that's going on. So I actually will put some links in this bio of this podcast, but I suggest First America is a podcast by Rebecca Nagle. It's really cool. I think they have, I guess, two episodes, actually only 2 episodes so far. Rebecca Nagle is a phenomenal journalist. She's a Cherokee Nation citizen. and just really solid and pulling in some great facts and areas. And she's basically looking back at the America and be able to ask us, the question of where the Native Americans within this 250 years and what was going on in all the areas there. So it's a great podcast of bringing out some good areas. Some other good ones I think are great is, of course, you have the People's Guide to the United States. It's definitely a good classic in a lot of ways, pulling out some deals. Um, this is another one. This is How to Hide an Empire. Really kind of showing how a lot of the things that America did in the empire was kind of hidden in a lot of areas. And I have another book I kind of recommend, but I want to be kind of I have a caveat to it because this author is I have issues with this author. But this is basically, indigenous people history of the United States. Um, Roxanne Dunbar Artez. I learned a lot from this book, and I thought it was really good, well written, great factuals. However, I've since learned that a lot of her, she's a self-identified Cherokee, and there's some questions surrounding that. And I don't know if the questions are true or not, but I just know there's a lot of controversy around her self-identification. I you guys probably, I don't know, I don't talk a lot here about it, but I'm like, either you're a citizen or you're not. I mean, I know there's some issues with blood quorum. That's the issue, but Cherokee Nations were linear ascent, and if you I'm going off a little bit. Read the be careful with the author, but I think her content of this particular book, I cannot speak about their other books, but this particular book I think was helpful. So a little caveat to that one. Enjoy, read, listen to the podcast you can, learn about your nation, learn about the great things and not so great things. Just like in the scriptures, hey, if you'll read the scriptures, in the scriptures you see a lot of good things and a lot of not so good things. David was good, and then he was not good, right? And Solomon, and so again, if we follow just the model of the scriptures, we will read truth, all truth, not just the propaganda that we're fed. So thank you guys. Would appreciate it. And you guys have a great time. And I will see you the next episode of Fractured Faith. So Donna Daga Ai until we meet again. Bye.